Day 2, basement, garage, history. Um, Yesterday, we were still in the War 1812. We had the fall of Washington, D.C. We had the British leave. We had the British attempt to take Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor. And the Star Spangled Banner was written. The War 1812 is almost over. Actually, it's a lot closer than people think. But the last real major event that you can somewhat say is part of the War 1812 is the Battle of New Orleans. And if you want New Orleans to stand, and you don't want New Orleans taken over, and you want to kill British soldiers, there's one guy in particular who would be fantastic for that job, and that guy is Andrew freaking Jackson. A matter of fact, Andrew Jackson will become a national hero because of the Battle of New Orleans and his victory there. New Orleans is the key to commerce on the inside of the country, and the British decide that if they can cut off the interior of the United States, that maybe in peace talks that the United States will have to give some things up. And so they launch an offensive from the Caribbean, and they sail towards New Orleans. Andrew Jackson scrambles around for a while. The Americans know this fleet is coming. He's not exactly sure what they're up to. And then they figure out that New Orleans is the target. And there's only so many places that they can land an army and attack New Orleans from. And so he kind of whittles it down to the last 3 or 4 places that they can actually pull this off, and eventually he figures out where they're coming. Now, Andrew Jackson is going to assemble an army, if you want to call it that, in New Orleans. He had a militia with him, but he's going to round up every single person that he can that can fire a gun. Pirates, freed Africans, Indians, people off the street, you name it, and he's going to put this army together to stand in front of this British army that's going to be way, way larger than him. In January 1815, if you've seen 300, or if you've seen the story of Thermopylae and the Spartans, the same thing sort of happens. Andrew Jackson finds a thin piece of land, water on one side of him and a swamp on the other, and so this British army, to get to the city, is going to have to attack through this funnel essentially. And Andrew Jackson is going to have his army build a fortification with hay bales, mud, dirt, you name it. And on January 5th, that army is going to get attacked by the British. And the British are going to come along that little strip of land under a pretty thick fog. And what happens is that they get about halfway to Jackson's lines, and the fog starts to lift. And Andrew Jackson's army is basically going to slaughter thousands of British soldiers. I think 2,000 within a half hour once the fight begins. He's going to slaughter them in the open. There's nowhere to go other than backwards. They can't go into the swamp to the right. They can't jump into the river to the left. And they just get massacred by Andrew Jackson and his men. He ultimately loses, the number changes here and there. He ultimately loses 71 people. The British have 2,500, 2,000 that are wounded within a half hour. And it essentially ends any more British ambition here in the United States. And like I said, we love war heroes as presidents. Andrew Jackson is going to become a war hero. He's going to become a national name, and his exploits are going to be told over and over again. And he's going to become very prevalent when it comes to American politics, first serving as a member in the House and eventually becoming President of the United States, which is a different story for a different day. like I said, the Battle of New Orleans probably should have been the greatest victory of the war at 1812, except for one problem. The war at 1812 had been over for 2 weeks when the British marched on Andrew Jackson's lines. The problem was that no one there in New Orleans realized it was over, because word doesn't travel across the ocean that fast. And so all the people who died at the Battle of New Orleans essentially died for zero reason. But in the end, it happens. Andrew Jackson becomes a national hero. He's not done making a name for himself. That'll come here probably tomorrow or the next day. But he becomes, he becomes the Andrew freaking Jackson that we laugh about in class all the time. It's another notch in his story of hilarious that things he does and pulls off that just can't almost be believed. So you have the whole Fort Mims and him taking Creekland away at this point, and him avenging the people at Fort Mims, and you have him having this great victory in New Orleans. I have in your Schoology folder, there's a video there about the Battle of New Orleans. It's 10 minutes or so. If you want to check it out, I think it's really good. And there's something that's fun in there that you kind of gotta go with me on this one. Billboard's #1 song of 1959. I put a link to it. Actually, there's 2 links to it. One of those links is the song with the words, and one of those links is the song done to Lego animation. Check them out, and I promise you that by the time you've listened to it more than twice, it will be added to your iTunes, or at least downloaded on your phone. The #1 song of 1959, The Battle of New Orleans by Johnny Horton. Like I said, the war was already over. It had been over for 2 weeks. No one knew about it. The War 1812, and this is on the test, so you know if you're highlighting, if you're going along. The War 1812 is ended with the Treaty of Ghent. And essentially the Treaty of Ghent, and I've told you this before already, the War 1812, no one wins, no one loses. And so when the War 1812 is over, it's ended by the Treaty of Ghent, nothing changes for either side. Essentially everything goes back to where it was before the war started. The British had been at war with the French for so long, and they had the experience of the American Revolution, and we talked about how theoretically it's impossible for them to win a war here as long as the people here keep resisting. They know that, the United States knows that, and so they just decide, 2 guys who've beaten the crap out of each other and laying on the ground, they both decide they've had enough. Wars are too expensive, and there's nothing really to be gained at this point. And so everything goes back to the way it was for the United States and for the British. No borders, nothing changes, except for one little thing that really can't be measured for the United States. And I've talked to you a lot of times in class about even though the United States after the Revolutionary War, and you see this with the Articles of Confederation, you see this with the war debt after the Revolution and how the southern states didn't want to pay for the northern state war debt. Even though we were the United States of America, there was nothing that really united them. They didn't call themselves Americans at that point. People from Virginia were Virginians. People from Pennsylvania were Pennsylvanians. There was nothing that had really united them. There was no sense of national pride at this point. The War 1812 is going to change that. In most Americans' eyes, the War 1812, we won. We declared war on the most powerful army in the world. They showed up here. They did some damage. Ultimately, we've sent them home, and America is still the same. And so in most Americans' eyes, America won the War of 1812. And for the very first time in this country, you start to get a sense of nationalism that never existed before. People are going to start feeling proud about being part of the greater whole of America, and that American tag will start to be used for the first time. The United States is going to go through what's called the era of good feelings for about the next 20 years, 15 years. There won't really be any wars. Nothing too dramatic is going to happen. Monroe is going to win the presidency in 1816 and 1820 relatively easily. The Federalist Party kind of goes away. Everyone is a Democratic Republican. There's not a two-party system at this point. The second party's coming. I think you can guess who brings it. Andrew freaking Jackson. And the second party's coming, but you're going to go through a period here where there's not a whole lot that happens. The United States starts to prosper. We keep our sense of neutrality. People feel like Americans for the first. It's the era of good feelings for a reason. But we will solve some of the border problems, and we'll pick it up there tomorrow. And we're going to start making the United States look a little bit more like the United States. Hope you stay healthy. Hope you keep your distance. Hope I'm doing all right. This is really odd being here. I miss you. And we'll keep doing this till we have to do it, and we'll get through it. Any questions, email me. I'm here all day at home waiting for stuff from you. And so if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. See you tomorrow, maybe the next day. Take it easy.
We will get by, we will survive.